Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome once again to the Everyday Missionary Podcast. And this is episode 166. And not only that, but it is the episode that is 1 week away. Yes, 1 American week away from the election. And in this entire season of the podcast, we've certainly been talking about how faith intersects with politics, how our faith is to inform our politics, how sometimes our politics actually inform our faith and the risk of that. So we've been all over the map just trying to unearth some things. And I want to be clear again about what my heart is, because I think in doing something like we've been doing now for, I guess, over 2 months probably. I think I've probably had somewhere around 8 or 9 podcasts that are dedicated to just intersecting with these topics. My heart in this is not anything other than to try to maintain the purity of the Christian faith. And in that, I find that sometimes the things that most threaten the Christian faith are the things that we don't easily see as a threat. So I think it's very easy to look and say, oh, well, liberalism threatens Christianity, or hedonism threatens Christianity, or maybe humanism threatens Christianity. But what I find is so often fear threatens Christianity. Sometimes our own sense of desire for security or comfort or prosperity or whatever, that threatens Christianity. And so much so that I honestly believe that if Christianity becomes something on the margins of American society, it won't be because it was persecuted into that place, but rather because it was diluted into that place, because we got so captivated and captured by the cares and concerns and worries and fears of this world that we sold off little pieces of our spiritual soul for earthly convenience, earthly comfort, or earthly security. I honestly believe what threatens American Christianity is frankly American Christianity more than any other single entity. And I know for some of you that's already frustrating, and you're like, no, you don't get it, you don't see, you don't absorb all the information I do. And I go, you're probably right. I probably don't do that. But what I do know as a pastor now for a long period of time is this has probably been the thing I've repeatedly tried to communicate toward for almost 30 years. I think for 30 years, I've been bugging my evangelical counterparts, kind of making them a little frustrated that I seem to take this very moderate approach to Christians and politics, or if anything, I seem a little pressing against, warning of, trying to downplay the critical nature surrounding our involvement in politics. And my motive there is not simply to be some kind of weird closet liberal or some anti-conservative or some whatever a person might want to call me, because that's usually what happens, because they go, well, evangelicals always go this direction, and Matt, you push against that, so you must really be a closet this instead, right? That's not it. For me, it really does come down to the fact that I think what makes the message of Jesus, and I think the framework of the New Testament so radical, is that it is disentangled from the nations and cares of this planet, and it brings an upside down message to a backwards world. And so if we start to sacrifice those things, even for some good earthly things, but if we lose these distinctive core values of what Jesus brings in the message of the kingdom, everything else doesn't matter. Right? In fact, you could have a perfect society where nobody cusses and everybody says yes, sir, and yes, ma'am, and everything is perfected and everybody goes to church on Sundays, and Christ is still not supremely lived out and preached and shared in the way that we see in the New Testament. That was an idea that Barnhouse actually promoted when he says, you know what, if Satan ran the United States, it would look perfect and pristine, as long as we weren't embodying the person of Christ and the distinctive values he lived out in the world. See, that is what I most care about. And so when we talk about politics and elections and candidates and policies and all of that, what I care about at the deepest part of that is being distinctly Christ-like in those environments. So when I'm not seeing distinct Christ-likeness, and I'm seeing us sometimes, again, sell our souls for temporary things at the cost of eternal values, that's when I start to want to kind of poke and prod and push and be like, hey, what are we doing here? What is this all about? What does this really mean? And in the end, I go back to, it doesn't really, to me, matter whether somebody decides they're going to vote for Joe Biden or Donald Trump or the Libertarian Party or a write-in candidate or some other third party, the Constitution Party, whatever it is. Like, more the motives of heart are what's critical in that, and the tone that we use within the world is critical in that, because again, we want to remember that we have a mission here, and the mission is not the preservation of our society, but rather it's the preservation of the distinctive of Christ and his gospel. That's what counts. So with that, today for episode 166, this 1 week before the election, I just want to promote a certain kind of idea here. And I'm going to be transparent with you. Something I'm a big fan of, something I am not a fan of at all. And for some of you, this may be the last time you listen to the podcast, because you're going to be like, this guy's gone too far this time, I'm done. Others are going to be like, he oversold that and it wasn't that big a deal. I don't know. We'll see. But I'll tell you what I am not a big fan of. I am not a big fan of the phrase Christian nation, right? America as a Christian nation. I am not a fan of the notion of a Christian nation. I have never been the fan of that idea. I will never be the fan, I believe, of this idea of a Christian nation. And I'm not getting into whether we started off as one or not. That is certainly a debate to be had. I probably land more on the side of kind of yes, but not really no. In other words, I think most of our framing as a country isn't Christian, but it's actually Jewish. It's mostly Old Testament, not New Testament. It's why you're not going to find Jesus or Christ in the Bill of Rights. You're not going to find him in the Constitution anywhere. You're not going to find him in the Declaration of Independence. What you find is a lot of ideas that are borrowed from the Old Testament law, not the New Testament gospel. So again, I would say we're more Judeo than Christian, but more than that, I don't care for this phrase Christian nation. In fact, I don't think a Christian nation is a very good idea at all. In fact, more to the point, I think when you start to form a Christian nation, you start to commingle two worlds that don't actually intend to go together. The kingdom and the kingdoms of this world. They do not cohabitate. This is why when Jesus returns, he says all the kingdoms of this world are disbanded, and then there's a reformation of a singular kingdom, which is his kingdom, which is unlike anything else this world has ever seen. This is why Jesus says before Pilate, hey, if my kingdom was of this world, my followers would fight, but my kingdom is so backwards from the world that you all have engineered here that they don't even go together. So I don't even bother picking the fight, because the fight isn't even worth having, because it's so radically different. One day I'll set up a new kingdom and it will supplant all the other kingdoms. And so with that, as soon as we start trying to say Christian, big C, and nation, little n, we're going to have a problem, because what will happen in that so often is to run a nation, you sort of have to do some things that are unchristian, all right? That's just going to be part and parcel to what's in the secret sauce of running a nation. And so often when Christianity gets too embedded with government, when it gets too embedded with politics, it will inevitably sort of set the cross to the side, and it'll pick up, as Greg Boyd likes to say, the sword. So we sacrifice the cross for the sword. You give us power, and power tends to corrupt us, which is why what the cross is, in essence, is the ultimate laying down of power. It is the ultimate powerlessness, right, to display God's truest, deepest power, which is love and grace. There is nothing more powerful than love and grace. Those things supplant sin and fallenness and unholiness. So the fact of the matter is, the cross is this display and demonstration of radical powerlessness. The kingdom that Jesus promoted was radical powerlessness, so much so that he says, you know, you want to really make a dent in the world, you want to change things, lay your lives down. Take up your cross and deny yourself. You want to save your life in this life, you're going to lose it. But if you lose your life for my sake, you will find it. I mean, Jesus was very clear that his kingdom is opposites. Radical, crazy opposites. All the time, in every way, it's just opposites. And so this idea of a Christian nation, when it's been tried in the past, fails every time. I use this as an example recently, where if you go back and you look at Europe and Christendom, the Catholic Church became also the political body. And with that, there was corruption, there was immorality, there was murder, there was loaded courts. I mean, you name it, it did it, all in the name of Christ, all in the name of the Christian faith, in the name of the gospel. There was bias, there was, enslavement of people, there was monetary shenanigans, power grabs galore. I mean, there's just something about it that Christianity, when it starts to use the tools of the world, just becomes the world. It doesn't seem to do a good job of leveraging the world for kingdom gains. It just struggles with that most of the time. And so instead of a Christian nation, here's what I'm a big fan of. Christians in a nation, all right? And I know that seems like, well, that's a play on. Well, not really, right? A Christian nation says, we're going to take the values of the Bible and make them our governing policies. Where Christians in a nation say, you know what, I don't need to worry about whether my government shares my values or not. What I need to worry about is that I am an ambassador of Christ in this environment. I am a missionary within my world. I am bringing the kingdom values to bear on my environment. And in that, ready, here's the most important part. I'm transcendent in the midst of that. In other words, I am not wanting this world to give me what I want. I'm not asking this world to serve my interests or needs. I'm not asking this world to be my savior, but rather my savior lives outside and above this world. One day he will redeem this world. And in the meantime, this world is broken, and I'm simply here to reveal him, his heart, his love, and his grace to the people around me. Therefore, a Christian in a nation is far more powerful than a Christian nation. And that's the big thing I want to push today, right? That more than, again, seeing us get back to some Christian nation roots, which A, was never really there, and B, really didn't represent Jesus all that well anyway. What we need is distinctively Christian people in this nation and in every nation. Because Jesus's vision is for the world. In fact, just that painful reminder, I have read the Bible many times. I've never seen America. It's not in there. America is not even in the Bible. So what we want to realize, though, what is in the Bible is a promise to bless all the nations through the promise to Abraham. And what is the blessing of the nations to Abraham? It was Jesus come incarnate for us. Galatians chapter 3 kind of ties that knot between Genesis 12 and the New Testament. Jesus is the promise. The gospel is the promise of blessing. And our concern should be for all the nations to be blessed, for all the nations to be touched by the gospel of grace, and for us to live out that distinctive policy of the kingdom policy above all else. In fact, in 1 Peter chapter 2, there's this great section, and he says this, and this starts off really important for us as I'm talking about the difference between a Christian nation and Christians in a nation. He says, "Dear friends, I warn you." So Peter's not just saying, hey, here's an idea. He's saying, here's the great threat that we as Christians need to worry about. He says, "I warn you as temporary residents and foreigners." So he's telling us right off the bat, our placement in this world is fundamentally, this place is not home, right? We're just rolling through. We're trying to leave it better than we found it, but this is not the thing we're banking on. This is not the thing we're dying for. We're not dying for this world. We're not dying for this land. No, we know that there's something more important that's ahead. So he says, "I warn you as temporary residents and foreigners to keep away from worldly desires that wage war against your very soul." Now, I think sometimes when we read that, we go, oh, okay, worldly desires like lust and drunkenness and money. And I go, sure, those are totally true. But there's also worldly desires like the desire for security, the desire for prosperity. There's desires that we have in this world that say, you know what, I, as a Christian, I want it to be as comfortable as I can, and as comfortable as I can means I want a certain kind of culture that favors what I most care about, what I most desire, that disenfranchises people that I don't agree with and whose lifestyle I'm not on board with. And then from that, we begin to lose our distinctiveness. We forget we're passing through. We forget that we are missionaries to people that are other than us. We forget that actually these people that we sometimes vilify and we go, oh, it's that group and that group and that group and that group. We're called to reach. We're not called to pinch off. We're not called to shut out. We're not called to vilify them and then, talk smack about them. No, we're actually called to go love them, to go engage with them. I mean, this is what I love about Paul. He goes into places, gets hated, and still's like, man, I'm relentless, man. I'm sticking with this to the end, right? And then when he just knows like it's over, he just dusts off and goes to the next town. Whether he's going to be hated again or not, doesn't matter. He's called to reach people, to be all things to all individuals so that he might win the more. And so he doesn't look at all of these people as enemies. He sees them as potential allies. That's why he shares the gospel with them. And so Peter, again, is in the same kind of framework. So he says, be careful because, again, your desire to ensure your security could haunt you as a missionary because, again, it starts to side up and it forgets the vision that we're supposed to have for the world, which is, in fact, for the world, being Christians to this place as servants to this world as opposed to asking this world to serve me, to give me what I want. So he says in verse 12, be careful to live properly among your unbelieving neighbors. Then, even if they accuse you of doing wrong, they will see your honorable behavior, and they will give honor to God when he judges the world. That is a super weird statement, right? I mean, the first part we kind of get, right? So we want to do things in such a way that we live properly toward those others, right? Those other types of people. I don't know what your others are. Right? But if the others are those on the left or those on the right, if your others are the gay community or the others are the militia community, again, I'm trying to represent all of us here, and we are all going to have our others that kind of spark our ire. And here he says, well, those people you want to be careful to live properly toward. And I believe when Peter says live properly toward them, it's very simple for him. It's just the golden rule, man. It's just the greatest commandment. Right? To love God and love your neighbor. And if you fail to love your neighbor, you're failing to love your God. And I talked about that, I think, last week out of 1 John, right? That if you can't love your neighbor that you can see, how can you love your God that you can't see? And so he's saying, you got to do it this way. And even if they go, oh, you're just those wingnut Christians and you think all these different things or whatever else, in the end, they'll give honor to God, it says, when he judges the world, because they're like, oh, we saw in them this otherworldly, other kingdom thing, right? So from this, he then says this. He says, be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether it be to the emperor supreme or to governors, as sent by him to punish those who do evil, and to praise those who do good. For this is the will of God, that by doing good, you should put to silence the ignorance of foolish people. So here's what I love about this. He actually is kind of saying, you know what, listen to the governors and listen to the rulers and listen to the lawmakers and everything else, right? Honor them as you do it. Doesn't matter if they're a D or an R or an I or whatever else, right? You honor them, you do good, you do those things, right? But also in this, it's this idea of saying, you know what, that's side A and you're side B, right? So people are going to rule the world, but your job is to be an ambassador in the world. And you let them do their job. That's great. And you be respectful as they do their job. That's great. But you've got a very different job, right? And the job is what we already saw there, right? We're to be very careful about our worldly desires and our worldly passions and our worldly wants. We are to make sure that we live properly, right, toward other people. And we make that investment. He says in verse 16, he says, for you are free, yet you are God's slaves. So don't use your freedom as an excuse to do evil. Respect everyone. Respect everyone. However we talk, whatever we post, whatever we say, must respect everyone. He says, don't use your freedom as an excuse to do evil. Respect everyone and love the family of believers. Fear God and respect the king. For God called you to do good, even if it means suffering, just as Christ suffered for you. He is your example, and you must follow in his steps. See, what this reminds us of is that, again, foundationally, as Christians in a nation, we are the servants to the nation. As Christians in a nation, we are the ones who sacrifice ourselves for the betterment of others. As Christians in a nation, we should be known as those who respect all people, that do good to all people, that don't get sucked into the passions of this world, that don't get fired up or fed up, but rather we get faith-filled by the fact that this world is short and eternity is long, and eternity is what matters, and the short thing that is here and now, this is just a testing and proving ground for us to live like Jesus until one day Jesus returns. That's how simple this kind of thing is. And so what we want to do above all else is not desire a Christian nation, but rather to desire a nation full of Christians. And when I say Christians, I mean those who embody the ethics of the kingdom, the values of the Sermon on the Mount, who realize that power and might and force don't make right. They don't make right in Jesus' economy. Rather, what did Jesus leave us as the example to do? To use our freedom as his slaves, to be willing to suffer so that others may come to life in him. What Peter has here is an evangelism strategy, right? It's an evangelism strategy that under the governments of the world, we bring something different to the table. And if we sound just the same, if we sound just like politic A or politic B, if we sound just like this party or just like that party, it no longer sounds like Jesus. And this is what I'm authentically passionate about more than anything else. If we fail to sound like Jesus and we sound like side A or side B, you know what? Again, that's what kills Christianity from the inside out, right? Forget the outside persecutors coming in. It's just an inside corruption that poisons everything. And you see that in Acts 20, right? Where Paul's warning the elders of the church in Ephesus. He says, listen, wolves are going to come in from outside and from among you that will destroy the flock. If anything can destroy the Christian flock in America, it's going to be that the Christian flock becomes more American than it is Christian. And this is where we have to remember where we are at our best, where we are strongest is actually when we're weakest. When we are at our best is when we take the servant's role at the table. We don't sit at the head of the table. Where we're at our best is when we relinquish the sense of we need control. And we give it all to Jesus, who is truly the one who is in control. When we approach the world with a loving faith as opposed to a condescending fear, like these are the things that we want to value and maintain as distinctly Jesus-like people in the world. More than ever, the world doesn't need to see more morality. It needs to see more Jesus. And yes, there is a difference. The Pharisees, incredibly moral, and they killed him, right? Religion can be very ethical, very moral, and devoid of the gospel, devoid of grace, and devoid of the great commandment. So again, we want to be really crystal clear on why we are here. There is a great command that we are to live out. There's a great commission that we are to fulfill. And more than having it accomplished by becoming some kind of, quote, Christian nation, no, we need to have a nation that has truly distinctive Christians that make a difference in the world and live as everyday missionaries.